Hey guys, this is Ben Sternke with Gravity Leadership, and looks like we are live here for the webinar on 5 things that missional is not. We're really excited to be here with you guys. I've got Matt Tebby with me and Mac McCarthy, who are both leaders in the Gravity Leadership ecosystem, so to speak. And we're really eager to share all of the stuff that we've got to share with you today. Just a couple things before we get started. Some of you guys have done this before, others have not, but we want this to be interactive. So hopefully, if you've got everything loaded up correctly, you should see a bar on the right there. That's kind of your webinar bar. And if you click in the chat window there, you should be able to say hi, which is what I'm going to do. So you should see my my thing there. I'm Ben Sternke. It says hi, guys. So if you guys want to use that, hey, Matt's saying hi to me. How you doing, Matt? Oh, Mac. Hey, how's it going? Hey, there's Gerald. Well, good, guys. Really glad that we're all here. I see some names that I recognize, and that's always fun. Fun for me. So that's the first thing. You guys can use that chat bar to interact with us. So while Mac and Matt are teaching and kind of giving you guys some of this content, feel free to type questions in the chat bar there, and we'll be monitoring that. Some of those questions we'll address live on the webinar. Others we may just try to address within the chat bar there. So that's the first thing. The second thing is on the next slide here, which I've got up there, there's some Twitter handles. So if you guys want to interact with us on social media, maybe post a quote or something like that. Gravity Leadership is @GravityLeaders, and then they've got Matt Tebby and Mac McCarthy as well. Note that Matt Tebby has 3 T's in the middle of his Twitter handle, 2 at the end of Matt and 1 at the beginning of Tebby. There is a poor individual named Matthew Ebby who continually seems to get messages that were addressed to Matt, and he seems to get upset about it. So, we don't want to bother him. So 3 T's in Matt, in Matt Tebby's name. And then the other thing to say is that we also have some resources that we want to make available to you during this webinar and after the webinar. And so you can look in your on the sidebar there. If you look at the offers sidebar, which there's nothing in there right now, but there will be after a bit. We've got a new product that we've been working on that's that we're excited about, that we're going to give to you guys for a pretty steep discount today if you want to order it today. And then there's also some of the other just ongoing coaching opportunities that we have that I want to make available to you. So I think that is about it for now, as far as like logistics and that kind of a thing. I want to introduce our presenters for today, actually have them introduce themselves. So Matt, do you want to go first? Just say a couple things about yourself so people know who you are.
Sure thing. My name is Matt Tebby. I'm a church planner in a suburb of Indianapolis. Ben Sternke and I actually pastor a church together called The Table. If you want to check out our website, it's thetableindy.org. We lead a missional community, and right now our church is a large missional community looking to land kind of in a regular worship time sometime this fall and winter. Been married 16 years to Sharon, have an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old, and also keep things running with Ben and another Ben at Gravity Leaders. So excited to share with you some of the things I'm learning about what it means to be missional today.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Mac, how about you?
Yeah, thanks. So my name is Mac McCarthy. I'm a pastor here in Wisconsin in a town called Oconomowoc, which is a pain to spell when you're ordering a package. But we're located about halfway between Milwaukee and Madison. I've been on staff here for 8 years, and we got some really great things going on here. So do a lot of discipleship leading discipleship groups, and we have some communities, much like missional communities in our context as well, that we're living into. Been married to my wife Josie for 11 years now, and we've got 3 boys, a 6-year-old, 4-year-old, and then our youngest is almost 2. So I too am excited just to be able to share with you some of the things that we're learning, and excited to learn alongside of all of you today. So thank you so much for joining us. We're entitling this webinar, 5 Things That Missional Is Not. And part of the reason we felt compelled to put this webinar together is there seems to be a lot of confusion surrounding the term missional. So the word missional is a lot like the phrase all natural. Like maybe you've had this experience when you go to the grocery store and you see like on every box or package or label the phrase all natural, and it sounds really good, right? It sounds inviting, like I should eat this, but no one knows what it means. And it's not until you really start looking at the ingredients that you realize, wow, this doesn't mean what I think it means. And that's a lot how the word missional is. Everyone's using the term. It's trending. I recently did a search on Amazon, just typed in missional. It came back with 1,417 hits. And almost every month it seems like a new book is being published with missional in the title. And yet, despite its widespread usage, it seems like it's being used in drastically different ways, and this can be really confusing and even frustrating. I'll tell you, like my first exposure to the missional conversation was simply one of frustration, because so many people were using this term in a different way, and I started to wonder, does this term even matter? Like, why use it at all? And as I continued to dig into the conversation, I want to tell you today, it absolutely does matter. Not only is there a core consensus around what the term means, but I think it's absolutely vital to lean into if you're going to lead like Jesus and multiply disciples, which is what we're all about here at Gravity. And so our goal today is simply to be helpful. By stating what missional is not and naming some of the confusion, we hope to give you a sense for what it is. So that's what we hope to accomplish today. And I'm just going to jump right in here. So 5 things missional is not. The first one is this: missional is not external activity. It's an identity that informs all activity. And if that sounds too strong to you, you can just add the word just. Missional is not just external activity. It's an identity that informs all activity. But this really gets at one of the biggest misunderstandings I've noticed around the term missional, and that is to simply reduce it to external activity, anything that's like happening outside the walls of the church, right? Be that like a new outreach program or an evangelism strategy or what have you. And you'll find this misunderstanding even in places that are all about the missional conversation. And so here's an example you might be familiar with. It's the 3DM triangle. If you haven't seen this before, it's really easy to understand. Up is about our relationship with God. In is about our relationship with believers. And then out is about my relationship or our relationship with non-believers. And the point is, Jesus lived into all 3 of these, and so should we. And I want to be clear, I'm not actually critiquing this tool because I think it's a very helpful tool for us, but rather one of the ways this tool is applied, which is to simply equate missional with the out in the triangle. And I want to say, no, missional is an identity first and foremost that informs all 3. And if we don't start there, we get into some serious trouble. If we don't start with identity, our activity can easily become misdirected. And so when I say we need to start with identity, guys, I'm just talking about God's identity. We have to start with God before we start with us. And at the heart of this missional conversation is the affirmation that God is missional. And so David Bosch says this. He says, mission is not primarily an activity of the church, but an attribute of God. God is missionary by nature. So mission is derived from the very nature of God. This is what we mean by the missio Dei, the mission of God. And we want to say that God's mission in the world is to restore and redeem all things to himself. And in the Bible, mission is often expressed in sent language. It's just things like, hey, the Father sent the Son into the world, not to condemn the world, but to save it, John 3:17. And the Father and Son send the Spirit, and then the triune God sends us. So Jesus says, for example, in John 20, as the Father has sent me, so I am sending you. And then he breathes on them and says, receive the Holy Spirit. So you can picture it like this. We got this little diagram for you. starting on the left, everything begins with God. Who God is informs what God does. So God is missional in his very nature, and that informs his activity. That's the second box. And out of God's activity, he calls a people to himself. That's Israel in the Old Testament, the church in the New Testament, and we're given God's missional identity. And out of that, then we join God's mission in the world. That's the fourth box. So I hope that helps you. Now, you might be wondering at this point, what practical implications does this even have? Right? This just seems like really heady. So what do I even do with this? And I tell you, like, it really changes everything. Because if you don't reduce missional down to external activity, you'll discover that everything is missional activity. Like anywhere the God of mission is active is missional. Anywhere God's grace is in motion is filled with missional possibility if we're awake to it. And so every space, every place, every second is filled with missional possibilities. Let me give you an example from our context. When I first joined our church staff 8 years ago, we had this giant sign as you left our parking lot that said, "You are now entering the mission field." And that kind of like captured our understanding at the time. And yet when we first kind of waded into this missional conversation, one of the first things we discovered is missional is about Sunday just as much as Monday through Saturday. So it's true, like when we leave the church, we're about to enter God's mission field, but it's also true we're in it and we just left it. It's true that God's at work out there, but it's also true that he was just at work in here. And so we ended up like it changed everything that was happening in our building. For example, our weekend services largely went from prepackaged performances for people to come consume to participatory environments where people were invited to attend to God. And that's a huge shift. And so now not only do we worship the God who's on mission, but we attend to him during the service. So we have moments throughout the service where we're inviting people to pay attention to what God's doing. And we actually have a team of people now that report back to us after every weekend service to say, here's where I noticed God at work in the life of our community this weekend. And we've made similar feedback loops for every ministry that's happening in our church. So I just want you to notice, our first engagement with missional was not additional, it was intentional. It wasn't creating new things and adding the label missional to it, but rather simply waking up to what God was already doing in our stuff, becoming divine detectives. And so I want to just close this first point with a few reflection questions for you, designed to just kind of stir you. Where is God already at work within the stuff you're doing? And so rather than thinking additional, just start with what you're already doing. Where is God at work within those things? How are your existing ministries creating space to attend to God? Are your ministries creating space at all? And then thirdly, what kind of posture is needed to become a divine detective? What kind of posture do you think is needed? And we're going to create some space to interact with your questions in a few minutes. So if those reflection questions stir anything in you, I just encourage you to shoot that question out on the sidebar, and we'll be getting to that shortly here. Let me jump into our second point today, and that is missional is not doing things for God, rather it's doing things with God. And this was huge for me. And part of the reason why is because it deviated so strongly from the way I was taught. So taught and trained, really. So both in my undergrad and my graduate program, I had to take classes on mission and evangelism. I've been to half a dozen evangelism seminars, and pretty much all of them share this in common. They're rooted in what I would call a Great Commission theology. And so here's what I mean by that. We start with the Great Commission. Matthew 28, go into the world and make disciples. And then the same predictable points tend to follow. There are a bunch of lost people who are going to spend eternity without God if we don't do something about it. We're currently not doing enough. Number two, we're currently not doing enough. We need to and can and should be doing more. Thirdly, Jesus has given us our marching orders, so we need to just get to it. And fourthly, so let's start taking this more seriously. Right? And then the rest of the training tends to be about giving tools so we can, in fact, take it more seriously. And so there's the 4 spiritual laws and the Romans Road and how to tell your conversion story in 93 seconds or less. Like, there's all these things we do. And I'm not downplaying the Great Commission, not at all. In fact, I would tell you my commitment to the Great Commission has only gone deeper as I've waded into missional theology and practice. But what I am saying is it would be a mistake to assume that missional is just a refocus on the Great Commission, or the Great Commission repackaged. Missional is really the Great Commission recontextualized. And here's what I mean by that. If you just look at where the Great Commission occurs in Scripture, it's really helpful, because it wasn't so much like, here are your marching orders, now go out and accomplish it for me. Rather, it was, here's the focus of your work, now wait here for the Holy Spirit. And so the context of Matthew 28 is Acts 1:8. And so the shift here is we want to shift from here's what we do for God in the world to what is God already doing, and how can we join it. And so Christopher Wright puts it this way. He says it's not so much that God has a mission for his church in the world, but that God has a church for his mission in the world. And we put that more succinctly for you on the screen there. It's not the church that has a mission, but God's mission that has a church. The mission belongs to God before it belongs to us. Right? This, again, is what's meant by this term missio Dei. God is always the primary actor when it comes to the story of redemption. He's the initiator. And our role, we do have a role to play, but it's a participatory one. We get to come alongside and join what God's doing. John Drain says this, another helpful quote: evangelism is not about Christians working on God's behalf because God is powerless without them. Effective evangelism must start with recognizing where God is already at work and getting alongside God and what is going on there. God's story, not ours, is the authentic starting point. So mission isn't about performance, it's about participation. It's not us making something happen, it's something we join. It's not something we design, it's something we discover. It's not something we can strategically plan, it's something we surrender to. And so the first move of joining God's mission is never our agenda, it's our awakening as we awaken ourselves to what God is doing. So again, you might be wondering, like, what implications does this have? And once again, I tell you, like, this changes everything. It changes everything. But I'll give you one practical example, and that's how you make decisions. And so if my lead pastor were on this call right now, he would tell you, this is how we used to make decisions. We would start with a great idea. Someone would have a great idea. Secondly, we'd look at, do we have the resources to make this idea a reality? And then thirdly, we'd get after it. And we might pray along the way or throughout, God, would you bless this? Or would you close the door if this isn't what we're supposed to be doing? Right? But now I tell you, we try to follow Bono's advice. Bono from U2 says, stop asking God to bless what you're doing. Find out what God is doing. It's already blessed. And so now our first move when we make decisions is to simply try to discover where God's leading. And I'll tell you, we tell our people constantly, perhaps with annoying frequency, we have to know what God's doing. We have to know what God's up to. We have to know where God is moving, because if we don't know that, we're not really following anything. We're just making up our own BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals, and then asking God to bless them. And at the heart of this conversation is a spiritual leader has his or her pulse on what the Spirit of God is up to, and invites and challenges people to join it. And so here are some reflection questions for you as we wrap up this second point. Do you have a team of spiritually discerning people around you? And I'll just put a little notation here. Just because someone's successful in some area of life, whether that's business or what have you, doesn't mean they're necessarily spiritually discerning. Do you have spiritually discerning people around you? Secondly, what practices help you listen and discern where God is already at work? What are those practices, and when do you do them? And thirdly, how are you equipping others to discern and join God's mission? Because we don't want to just be putting that on church staff and leaders. We want everyday, ordinary people to discern what God's doing and respond to it. So I think we can pause there and interact with some questions. Ben, I think you had something you wanted to share before we do that. Is that correct?
There could be. There's a couple things that I do want to share. I do want to share that we do see in the chat bar that we're having some difficulty with the video, and we apologize about that. But it looks like some of you guys have figured out a workaround, which is great. So don't hesitate to keep typing questions that you may have, not just technical questions, but questions that you may have just regarding the content, interaction that you have with what some of what we're presenting, and feel free to do that. So one of the things that we want to draw your attention to is this product that we're coming out with very soon, and I'm going to load it up here in the offers window. It's essentially, we're calling it 30 Days to Kickstart Your Life on Mission, and what we've got there on the slide is that it's a 30-day online course designed to help you overcome the resistance that keeps you from joining Jesus on mission with your family and friends. So a lot of the stuff that Mac is talking about and the stuff that Matt is eventually going to be talking about here, a lot of this stuff is addressed in this series of, it's a series of videos and worksheets and different kinds of things like that that get delivered to your email inbox over a period of 30 days. And it's just little tiny exercises and assignments that help us kind of kickstart this life on mission, especially in the way that Mac's been talking about it. The way that Mac's been talking about it is not, hey, let's get some great ideas on the table and let's figure out if we can execute them. It's how do we begin to pay attention to what God is doing? How do we begin to think through, like, how does that even work? Like, how would we know what God was doing? And so a lot of what we're trying to do in this video series is to help people sort through some of those things and say, what are some things that I can do right now that will help me begin to pay attention to that, so that we can take 30 days and establish maybe some new habits that will help us live into mission. So the deal is we're going to sell this for $47 eventually. But if you want to pre-order it today using the button there, the Buy Now button, you can get it for $30. So that's $1 a day if your division is off there. But if you do want to order that today, we're confident that's going to be a pretty good resource for you guys. So that's it. I'm just checking the chat bar here for questions. So here's one from Derek, and he asks this: what have you found to be good practices for listening and discerning to what God is doing? So that's great, Derek. The 30 days online course will help you with some of that stuff. But Mac, what would you say to that question?
Yeah, well, one of the things we say in our context a lot is God's not playing hide and seek. So, when we're genuinely trying to discover what He's up to, my assumption is that God wants to be known and wants His people to join what He's doing. But it's a community discernment, right? So it's not usually just like someone comes off a mountaintop and comes back and then announces it to the group. It's more we listen together, we pay attention together, and sometimes we may not be sure of something. We have to actually test it out. We sense God's leading us in this direction, and there's some humility around that, and then we'll design some exercises to explore that further, knowing we might have to get redirected or rerouted. And we actually see that in Scripture, like in Acts 16, Paul and his team, like they try to go to several places, and it's not until he receives a vision till they head to Macedonia. And so there's a posture of God's not trying to play hide and seek. We do this together. And there's also kind of a humility. Even when we sense we've heard something, we're open to being redirected.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good, Mac. That's really helpful. A really quick question from Andy. Is there anything wrong, though, with big, hairy, audacious goals, BHAGs? Are they wrong? Is there something off about those things? That's Andy's question. What would you say to that, Mac?
Not necessarily. If it's a God goal, you know what I mean? If it's something we've discerned God is inviting us into, I think if if you're really joining God's mission in the world, at some point it's going to feel like a big, hairy, audacious goal because it's going to stretch you way outside your comfort zone. But that's different than me coming up with a brilliant idea and then trying to get God on board. So it's more the order than the concept, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You'll definitely have big, hairy, audacious goals. But the question is, did it start with God or did it start with you?
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Matt.
Yep.
Good. Well, guys, let's move on. We've done a couple of these things. 2 things that missional is not. And Matt, I'm wondering if you can lead us through the next few things.
Yes, if I don't, no one will, I think, Ben.
That's true. I think that's kind of how we've set up this webinar.
I think I better. So the number 3, what missional is not, is that missional is not an add-on to discipleship, but mission and discipleship are the same thing. They're the same piece. I became a Christian in college, and didn't know what the words evangelism and discipleship meant, but very soon I got trained in what evangelism was. And I remember my training in college specifically was going door to door in dorm rooms, and we were to have conversations with people, and the conversations were sort of a mix between 3 things. There was a scare tactic, something about death, sin, hell, and then there was a sales pitch, some kind of Jesus juke there on the scare at the back end of the scare tactic, and then finally you were to go armed with argument. So there was debate. So there was a scare tactic, a sales pitch, and debate. So I learned this in college. Oh, that's what evangelism is. And then once somebody becomes a Christian, then now you teach them to do things, and they work harder at trying to do those things. And that's expressed differently in different traditions. Some people say, well, you obey now out of thanksgiving for the great gift and the cost that Jesus gave you. However it's framed, they're talked about as 2 separate activities. So I was in a mall in seminary. I was sitting around reading Christian books with Christian people and Christian professors with Christian wallpaper. It was one big Christian love fest, and I was getting sick and tired of never seeing any unbelievers. We went to the mall with this missionary from Eastern Europe. He said, well, let's do what we do in the Ukraine. So we walk up to people in the mall in 2x2s, and we ask them, if you were in the middle of the ocean and your boat capsized, would you need to be saved from drowning or from your sin? Yeah, I can tell by the silence that at least half of you just got saved. The other half are calling the mall police. The mall police were called on us, by the way. But there was this conversation of like trying to get people in this trap, get afraid, so I could give the sales pitch for Jesus, and then we were armed with arguments for why Jesus is better than fill in your blank random other god. We did get kicked out by a mall cop. I felt really weird about it, and at the time I didn't have language. But here's what I've come to realize about both evangelism and discipleship as I thought about them. It's that I often was using fear and persuasive coercion and argument to get people into the kingdom and then to get people to grow in the kingdom. And I realized that they were usually ineffective. They drove people away from me. And I wanted Christ to bring offense, but I felt like my methodology was bringing offense more than Jesus. And as I began to read Scripture, what I realized was Jesus came to save us from the very things I was using to get people saved. It's really psychotic, people. It's really crazy. Right? The most often repeated phrase in Scripture from God to humans is, do not be afraid. Jesus came to save us from our fear, not to capitalize on our fear. Right? Just think about this for a second. Why would I use the lever of fear to get people into no fear? Right? We have a lot of that's almost just like all I want Jesus for is to escape from hell, or to take away consequences for me, which may be some of the reasons why we have such paltry discipleship, but that's a different webinar. The power of the cross, too, we see in the New Testament. It isn't a sales pitch or a debate. Actually, Paul's missional strategy in a culture that loved debate was to not enter into it. This is 1 Corinthians 2, friends. The time, I would say, a lot of people say Jesus gets cranked up turning over the tables in the temple. I think the most cranked up I see Jesus is a demon-possessed person in Mark chapter 1. He is moved with anger at the evil that's reigning in people. But maybe tied for first is when he comes up the Mount of Transfiguration and he sees his disciples and the scribes arguing. Jesus almost never argued. He was invited to argue again and again and again and again and again, and he never gave into it because he knows what many of us are discovering today, that very few people are argued into the kingdom. And there's all kinds of social and neurological reasons for that. But it really cranked Jesus up because his disciples were getting off base. And Jesus is our model here at Gravity, and the more we study what Jesus does, and even the apostles, the more we see that he wasn't giving answers to questions. In fact, you've heard this from us before. Jesus was asked over 150 questions in the Gospels, and he only directly answers 2 of them. And so it's not scare tactic, sales pitch, and argument answers, but rather Jesus asks questions to open up space for people to discover and receive God in their midst. And so what I've come to see, what we've come to learn and understand is that discipleship and mission and discipleship aren't 2 things that need 2 different strategies, but they're one thing. Because both Christians and non-Christians need good news. I'm sorry if I'm the first person to ever say this to you. It should have been said before. Christians need the gospel every day. And unbelievers need the gospel every day. The way into the kingdom is the way through the kingdom. That's another way to say that. So when we say good news, and we train in this all the time, and so I'll try to summarize 6 months of training in 20 seconds. When we say good news, we're basically saying the good news of the gospel is who God is in Jesus Christ and who we are because of who God is in Jesus Christ. This disrupts a lot of our separate categories, how we like to categorize and box things out. We want to have clear lines between saved and unsaved, Christian and pagan. But as I look at Jesus' life, I see that he's giving one consistent message of good news to people, rather if it's Peter or if it's a demoniac, if it's a woman caught in adultery or if it's James and John. And this line between in and out gets a little blurred when we talk about this, but I think it's okay. I think it's okay because I think that's how Jesus and the apostles operated, right? This is some of the things that I've just wrestled with. When was Peter saved? What was the moment he was saved? And when did Jesus change his tactic from this is evangelism and this is discipleship? Friends, I can't make sense of the narrative of Scripture if I bring that to it. But if I say Peter was a man in whom God was at work, and he consistently needed good news for his bad news, that makes sense. And he becomes one of the chief leaders of the Jerusalem church, and obviously is saved. Jesus gives all authority in heaven and earth in Matthew 28. This is the passage that Mac just referenced, to a lot of disciples. But there's this amazing verse right before the Great Commission. And I think it's the great gamble. And that is, Jesus gives his authority not just to the people who are killing it, but the people who doubt as well. And so there's something about the good news of Jesus Christ that comes to believers and doubters, whether they're Christians or not, and says to them, I believe in you. I've invested my entire mission in creating disciples who can make disciples. The mystery of all the universe, the cosmos, is that the church, the people who believe and doubt, could embody the mystery to the principalities and powers, right? This is Ephesians 3, and that's my translation. That's not NIV. I just want you to, probably clear, but I just want to make sure you know that. Jesus invests people as good news with his authority, even when there's some ambiguity about whether they're in or out. And then from just another example of this, which just blows my mind. The first two missionaries that Jesus sends out in the Gospels, in the Synoptics, it's in Mark chapter 5, the Gadarene demoniac. He is a Gentile outcast, right? And in John's Gospel, it's a Samaritan woman, a heterodox adulterer. Neither of these people, friends, would pass any qualification examination from any missionary society that I know of, but Jesus is pleased to send them on mission right away because they've encountered who God is in Jesus Christ, and they've come to experience who they are because of who God is. They've encountered God's story, they've encountered good news in their story, and they have something to bring. So discipleship and mission, same process. Discerning where God is at work, listening and proclaiming good news right there where people are at. That calls for a faithful response that is tangible, concrete, and specific. Whether that's going to 12 cities or leaving a water jar and proclaiming in the middle of a group of people that you are so ashamed of and shunned from that you have to go to the well in the middle of the day by yourself, you step right back in your shame and you trust good news and you proclaim good news. So, friends, I've gone on too long. I'm always 2 seconds away from a rant. I got a little ranty there. Here's the deal. Questions for reflection here. How does this understanding of mission and discipleship bring clarity or confusion for me? Maybe it challenges some categories for you. It's okay. It's fine. We can have a conversation about that. We can dialogue about that. 2, to have an imagination for what good news sounds like in my own life. If we're going to become people, we call it gospelers. If we're going to become gospelers, then we have to be hearing good news. We can't give to others what we haven't received ourselves. So to have an imagination for what that sounds like, or is that just gobbledygook? Is that just mumbo jumbo? And 3rd, what changes about my approach and posture if this mission and discipleship are of one piece? What changes about my my methodology? Right? If these things are integrated rather than two things, what does that change for me? All right, so throw some things up in the chat, and we'll come back to that here in a second. But let me go to number 4, and that is number 4. The 4th thing that missional is not. Missional is not a strategy for cultural relevance. It's a posture we take as divine participants. Missional is not a strategy for cultural relevance, but it's a posture we take as divine participants. Very few people will tell you they don't want to be missional. No one, very few. Mac knows a few. Mac knows a few people that want to be anti-missional, but they have gone away sad. But the vast majority of people, and I'm assuming most of us on this call, we in general, depending on how it's defined and filled out, in general, like, yes, that's a really good idea, right? And so what ends up happening is we want to be missional so much that there's so many different takes on what it means. And one of the moves that we experience in our coaching and consulting at Gravity, we see that churches make and church leaders make, is that we adopt the language of missional, but keep old paradigms and postures and practices in the world from maybe what we could call an institutional, attractional way of organizing church. So basically what happens is missional becomes the new brand name that I put on what I'm already doing with the logic and the paradigm and the posture that I've always had. But missional is not a brand, and it's not and that word imports a whole word of meaning. So it's not the new attractional. It's not a church growth strategy or a recruiting technique. And even though it's hip, it's trendy, we're not giving our lives to being missional because we want to trend on Twitter or because the Instagram pictures that have missional hashtags get hearted. That's not what we're about. I want to suggest that missional is a posture in the world. It's a way of weakness, humility, of self-emptying, of not coming with worldly power and all the provision and being well respected, but rather coming as God does in Jesus Christ, emptied of power, living with the poor, impoverished, and being one who is despised. I sat down with a pastor in the Bible Belt about a year ago, and we were talking about missional, and I just met him. He's a great guy, and he was telling me about how excited he was about how his church was finally getting missional. And I've told the story before, so if you've heard it, go ahead and check email and check your Twitter and come back in 90 seconds. But he was saying that he was excited that his church is getting missional, and I asked him, what do you mean? And he talked about this huge canned food drive that they had just done. 9 churches over 6 weeks, and there was a food pantry in town that was out of food. They'd had a natural disaster in this town. And they raised over 12,000 cans of food from all these different churches. And they celebrated the culmination of this. They rented out this stage, an outdoor mall, set up a platform, and had a 3-hour worship service with bands from all the churches playing together and people bearing witness and giving testimony, and people from the food pantry getting up and thanking. And it was this incredible public display and witness to what God had been doing in and through them. And I remember listening to this thinking, man, that is amazing that you're feeding all these people, and thank God for the church. But I was so distracted by the word missional because I would just never use that activity. I would never use the word missional to describe that activity. And I think the best way to talk about that is to just reference Luke 10 briefly here. And we're going to get to some of your questions. I'd love to hear questions for clarification, or let's be collaborative today and make this a generative conversation. But in Luke 10, we see a different posture than the worship service. Oh, and they put all the cans on the stage. I mean, this huge edifice to sort of like show off the cans, which I'm sure was an impressive thing. In Luke 10, we see it's a paradigmatic text for us about that trains us and teaches us how to be in mission. And we see Jesus calls disciples to inhabit the world in a different kind of posture, right? In regards to power, he sends them out in pairs. He doesn't send them out as a huge in mass going like there's not power in numbers. He sends them out in pairs so they don't overwhelm towns. He sends them out as sheep among wolves. Wolves have more power than sheep. Things are dangerous, and they are going to be vulnerable. And he commands them in Luke 10 to pray. He sends them out and literally says, pray for more workers to be sent out as they go. And this is, I think, an indication that they're to go with a posture of surrender. The prayer is, Lord, send out workers in the harvest, and here is me offering my body as a living sacrifice in view of the mercy of your mission. Jesus sends people out not powering up, but laying power down. Laying power down. So there's a posture, there's different relationship to power. There's a posture, different relationship to possessions. Jesus doesn't send people out with all the money, all the food, all the provision, and say, we've come to give. He sends people out and says, don't take any money. Don't take a change of clothes. Don't take a pair of shoes, right? Go having to rely on the hospitality of those you seek to reach. Don't go giving, go receiving, right? Remain in the house, eat and drink what's set before you. So Jesus changes the way. He sends us out not independent, but interdependent, relying on those we come to seek. And then finally, there's a different relationship in regards to popularity. right? They're not to talk to people on the way. They're to stay in the first house that greets them, not garner favor from everybody. That they're told that not everyone will like them or receive them. They're told what to do when people don't welcome what you want to do there, right? And they're told at the end not to focus on all the breakthrough, not to say, hey, let's look at this great work we did. Hey, look at the Samaritan. I'm gonna get a little cheeky, so bear with me. They're told not to rejoice because of how many cans of food they raised, but rejoice because of their relationship to their Father. Keep your eyes on the Father. Friends, we live in a world where we're convinced that the only way to get things done and make things happen is to have money and control, to have power, right? And to go giving people who need something. And we're drawn to the people who have the largest status, the largest magnetism. We're drawn to the popularity of a celebrity culture. But missional challenges the dominant cultural paradigms of our relationships to power, possessions, and popularity. And that's the difference, friends, I think, between how I use the word missional and how this great guy, he's a good guy, was using the word missional. I see that as a good work done in Jesus' name that doesn't have a full understanding of how missional changes our relationship to power, provisions, and popularity. So, some reflection questions just to this time. Which of these three that I've narrated we see in Luke 10 and other places, power, popularity, possessions, is the greatest temptation for you and your church to use in mission? So if we're going to make use of one of these things rather than surrender them, which one are we most tempted to do? And then what specifically, I know you know the story, I didn't read it out loud, but in Luke 10 specifically, which of those practices or postures, which of them specifically help you reflect on your methodology and approach?
Good. Thanks, Matt. That was great. We do have a few questions. Ryan is asking, what kinds of questions do you often find yourselves asking people you are trying to disciple into this new way of being? So what kinds of questions help people into these paradigm shifts?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ryan. I find the question that Jesus uses a lot is brilliant. And that is, Jesus asks a question regularly of people: what do you want? What do you want? Jesus gets people in touch with their desire, their wanter, as Dallas Willard used to say. And unless your wanter is on the table, you're wasting your time. So helping people name what they want, and then discerning what does God want you to know about what you want is really important.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and I think I would just say too, in addition to that often feels, I don't know if you guys feel that feels risky, doesn't it? Because I'm afraid as a leader, if I ask people what they want, they're going to say something that's not like being a disciple of Jesus, right? That sort of thing. So that question is important. It feels risky as a leader, but I think we don't really begin to make disciples until that question is on the table, until we move into this posture of saying, what do you actually want? And then, Jesus is able to work with people. So there's a cool story in, I can't remember where it is in Mark, but James and John, Jesus asks them, what do you want me to do for you? And they're like, well, we want to sit on the right and the left. And Jesus says, well, I can't do that for you. And then he talks to them about what it means to be a leader, in his kingdom. And then he asked blind Bartimaeus the same question just a few verses later. He says, what do you want me to do for you? And blind Bartimaeus says, I want to see. And he says, well, I can do that, so let it be done unto you according to your faith. But in both cases, there was a breakthrough of the kingdom that happened after somebody owned what they wanted. When blind Bartimaeus owned that he wanted to see, and Jesus said, great, you can do it. Or when James and John owned that what they really wanted in their heart of hearts was power. We want the power, Jesus, right? We're attracted to the power. Jesus, you'll notice, doesn't reject them. He doesn't say, "Ugh, you guys are idiots and you'll never get this." Instead, he takes them right where they're at and says, "Well, I can't give you that, but let me tell you what you're missing here." And he uses it as an opportunity for the kingdom to break into their lives. So it's a brilliant question that we're learning to ask. Here's another question that is intriguing to me, and that I'd say Mac and Matt, maybe both of you guys could weigh in on this. Derek asks, how does this missional posture that you're talking about engage with or perhaps confront the culture-making language that's sometimes present in the missional discussion? And do you guys know, I'm sure you guys are familiar with this, but there's a sense in which, there's actually a book I think called Culture Making, and that has this sense of, here's how we be missional in the world. There's this sense of engagement, but how does what we're talking about in terms of a missional posture, how does it interact with that? How does it perhaps confront that? What would you guys say to that?
Yes. That is another webinar. I would say that let's just just for two dichotomous kind of cultures. Let's say Apple computers has created culture in America, and Mother Teresa created a culture in Calcutta, but two very different ways of making culture. And I think the missional, so I don't think we can escape culture making, but it's all about the way of culture making that I'm concerned with. And I think that as we use the word missional, as you see some of our relationship to power, it changes our relationship to possessions, it changes our relationship to popularity. I would say that in general, Apple uses power, popularity, and possessions to make culture. And culture like Mother Teresa would subvert the cultural narrative of those or lay them down, right, in order to create culture. I think the missional way of culture making is more Mother Teresa than Steve Jobs. That would be the quick and overgeneralized answer, Eric.
And to clarify, Matt, you're saying not just in the missional way is not just more Mother Teresa in terms of its content, right? But in terms of her posture, and then the posture of Steve Jobs, right? It's not just because Mother Teresa is a Christian.
Yes, I was gonna make a joke about computers and lepers, but that's leprosy is still not funny. Yes, that is what I was saying. It's not so much about content; it's about how you inhabit the world.
Yes, good. Yeah. Mac, anything to add to that? Comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't think we can escape culture making, right? But I would emphasize the agency component, which again is that I don't think we make culture for God. If it's His mission, then He's leading that. Any cultural change, any cultural formation, that's something He's producing, and we join. And so the question is, what does that culture look like? And I agree with Matt. It's got to look like Jesus. It's got to line up with the way of Jesus, and that looks very different than Apple, right? Mm-hmm. So, but I know in my context, when we talk about producing a missional culture as a community, I think we immediately start going in a misdirected way if we don't recognize that our culture making is joining what God is producing.
Yeah.
So all of our energy, all of our effort is essentially a participatory one rather than something we're doing on our own.
Good. Well, good guys. Let's right before we get into the fifth thing that missional is not, I just want to make mention of a couple times both Mac and Matt have mentioned that we do coaching and we do training with leaders, and these are 12-month groups that meet pretty much every week. That all of the stuff that we're talking about, especially this kind of stuff with missional posture, is so hard for us to imagine our way into if we just read a book about it or if we just come to a webinar about it. The best thing we can do on this webinar is kind of provoke the need for inhabiting the world in a new way, and provoke the need for a re-understanding of what it means to be missional. And the place that we do, I think, our best work as Gravity Leadership is in these coaching cohorts, where we meet with you meet with a group of people and a coach week after week. Lots of you actually on this webinar are part of these right now, real time, and have seen significant breakthrough in your life, just like we have as we've come through some of these processes and tools. But essentially, it's just it's weekly group coaching that helps you grapple with how do I inhabit my church, my family, my neighborhood in this new way, where discipleship and mission become the same thing, where I become capable of inhabiting the world with this missional posture and bringing culture making in that way. So anyway, you can check it out there. We've got the website is gravityleadership.com/coaching. I've also put in the offers tab there. You can get a free 20-minute consultation. And just to be super upfront, if you guys click sign up now and you fill out the contact form there, I'm just going to give you Mac his email address, and he's going to email you, and you guys are going to get 20 minutes on the phone with Mac. Just mention what your issues are with discipleship or mission, and Mac will magically make them all just disappear. Everything's going to be fine after 20 minutes. No, I'm just joking with you. But Mac will be happy to help you just think through some of that stuff. And if you are interested in getting into a coaching cohort, just please let us know, and we'll get you connected with somebody. You guys ready?
I'm ready.
For number 5? All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's do it. I think that's what's next.
Yep. Number 5. Missional is number 5. I speak for a living. Number 5. Number 5. Missional is not a sprint, it's a marathon. Mac and I are in 2 separate contexts. He is transitioning an existing large church, and Ben Sternke and I are planting a church. So I'm just going to speak for 2-ish, 3-ish minutes about starting a church, and then Mac's going to take this from sort of transitioning a church. For those planning a church, we really have like a blank slate in many ways, because there aren't things we have to repurpose or kill or neglect, but we can simply say, what is our mission vision? This can be a difficult exercise, but one of the tools we've learned from our friend Dave Rhodes, he works with 100 Movements now, is the passions, possessions, and problems and potential. So this sort of corresponds to the up and out triangle that Max showed you earlier, but we, as leaders of a church, have taken inventory of the passions we have. And that doesn't have to be like Jesus and praying and writing in my Beth Moore devotional. I mean, we're talking about just things we like to do, things we care about. So Ben is passionate about soccer. I'm passionate about college football starts in 2 days, and so like just anything we really care about and are passionate about. Then possessions. What kinds of capital do we have? What sort of things do we own? What sort of things are at our disposal? Property, relationships, even. And then what in our so that's in, and then out would be what problems do we see in our community, and what potential do we see in our community? So what would be different if the kingdom of God was in fullness, or where is the kingdom already beginning to blossom? And so this is just one exercise that helps get us kind of getting everything out on the table to help us discern what is God doing, and how is He inviting me to participate. These are kinds of things you can do in a church startup, and you can do this as a church team. You can go on prayer walks. You can right now in my neighborhood, we're simply getting to know neighbors. So I've been borrowing things from neighbors is a great way to reverse the power dynamic. That usually we want to go offering solutions and help, but we submit to other people and ask for things. Like that on the top 5 things in the suburbs, which is where I live, like that you don't want to do as a neighbor, it's have to depend on another neighbor. Ooh, that breaks the entire liturgy contract of the suburban America. But anyway, we're trying to do that. We're making some headway. And so there's different practices, and we can talk more about those in Q&A if you want to hear about those. But there's just two things I want to share about as a church start. And the one is it takes a long time. It takes a long time to discern and enter into mission. Mission can't be codified or commodified. I guess commodified is it. I'll try to codify my thoughts on how mission can't be commodified. So we don't possess or control it. Like I'm not showing up in my neighborhood with the implicit posture of the Christians here, you're welcome. Right? Mission often isn't manageable or safe. It doesn't behave itself. It doesn't work in my free time. Like I don't schedule mission into my free time, right? So there's a whole. It just challenges. It takes a while. It takes all of my life, and it's something I discern here. So when I moved to South Carolina 2 years ago, within 45 minutes of being on the ground with my moving truck, I met a neighbor who would teach an unbelieving neighbor who would teach me more about mission than I learned in the first 37 years of my life. Unbelievable. God's mission showed up on my driveway and demanded that I tend to it. I've been in Fishers for almost 2 years, and I'm still listening and discerning. God, where will there be breakthrough? Where will be fruitfulness? So it's unmanageable. It's unpredictable. So we learn to discern it. We need patience, and it's not accomplished quickly. So it's not something that it's not microwavable. It's not. We have sort of a sitcom attention span. We expect everything to be neat and tidy, but sometimes you spend 40 years in Midian as a shepherd, right? Sometimes you send Abraham, you call Abraham, you promise him things, and then you wait millennia. God isn't in a hurry in his mission, and we have to learn and train ourselves in our fast, quick, easy culture not to be in a hurry either. And finally, mission costs us. It costs us something. Costs us time and security and comfort. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to learn how to have a missional patience. So build infrastructure for the long haul. So we've started with discipleship, and we've started creating postures so that we can discern God's grace, discern what God is up to, first in our own lives, then in our neighborhoods' lives. So build the infrastructure of discipleship and mission. Build the infrastructure of worship, of gathering and scattering, of worship and service. Build it deep and build it wide. So we have to have patience, and we have to know it's not fast, quick, and easy, and it will cost us. So those are my thoughts. Matt, you want to share about an existing church?
Yeah. So, no matter what, you need missional patience. I think that's what Matt was talking about, and I think the permission meter is higher right from the start with a church plant. I'm going to talk about my context in a moment, but first I just want to share a passage that God has been using to shape me recently, and that's in Matthew 13. Jesus shares two parables, and he talks about how the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. So it starts small and then eventually becomes the largest tree. And then he talks about yeast and how it takes a while to work through dough. And I've been spending a lot of time in that passage, and the thing that's jumping out to me is that both of those parables have to do with pacing. A mustard seed doesn't become a tree overnight, and yeast doesn't work through dough in a minute. It takes time. And I think there's this idol of expediency in our culture, and Matt was narrating a little bit about that, but we just expect instant results, microwavable measurables, and it's compromising our faithful presence. Like, not a lot of people that I talk to have an imagination for a faithful obedience in the same direction over a long period of time in pursuit of fruitfulness. And so we just, if it's not working right away, we stop doing it and we give up. And so here's my context. I'm, like I said, located halfway between Milwaukee and Madison. Our church has experienced tremendous growth over the last 25 years. Our senior pastor joined our team 25 years ago with 150 people, and today we're right around 1,500. Now, here's the thing. Most of that growth happened using what I would call just an attractional model of ministry. So we're going to build out the best weekend programs. We're going to have the best, most compelling weekend services. We'll host amazing events, and we'll invite people to come. And here's the thing. They did come, and they even invited people to come with them, and we kept growing. And yet, a few years ago, we started to ask the question, okay, but what is this actually producing? And first thing I'll tell you is we had a lot to celebrate. Tons of people have come to faith, tons of transformation stories. So we didn't need to poo-poo on anything, right? But there was this underlining concern about what I would call the attendance versus discipleship ratio. So we had tons of people attending, way less people actually disciples who could then make disciples. And that's kind of when we started to get involved in missional theology and thinking. So we've been, over the last few years, making a shift to a missional culture. And I will tell you guys, it is painfully slow. Painfully slow. And it is not confrontation-free, because people have to give up things. They have to do things differently. Sometimes it feels like we take one step forward, like towards missional stuff, only to take 2 steps backwards. There are days when I want to pull out my hair. I actually have had to set up people, both within my context and outside of my context, to check in on me periodically to make sure my expectations, my pacing expectations are in order. Because here's what I've noticed. If you expect to shift to a missional culture immediately, one of 2 things will happen. The first is this: you will blow things up. You'll blow things up. Talking to a guy recently, another pastor, he started a church plant, and for the first year, it was really more of an attractional model of ministry, and everybody's on board, and it's going well. And then he starts reading stuff in the area of missional theology and practice, and he tried to shift it overnight. Like, he shows up one day at a staff meeting with this new direction, this new way of doing things. Church splits, and within 6 months, they're both shut down. If you don't, so he learned the hard way, you've got to change at a rate that people can stand. And in a bigger church, I'm telling you, I have to be very conscientious of where people are at, meeting them where they're at, and just giving them the next step. The other thing that will happen if you don't blow things up, but you expect things to happen right away, is you'll just give up. And so I've seen this as well. It's not that you'll blow things up. You'll recognize that people aren't ready for this, but then you'll go, okay, well, I'm just going to go somewhere else where the permission meter is higher, and I can move a lot faster. And it might be the case that God is calling you to lead in a different place. But I've just noticed a lot of people aren't leaving to lead in a different place because God's calling them. It's because of their own impatience. And so let me just close with this little story. A friend of mine just recently moved to a different house, same area, but just different house. And we were talking, and he said, the thing I'm going to miss most about my old house is the apple tree in the front yard. And he said, we planted that tree ourselves and had to take care of it, like treat it around the year, take care of it, keep for 4 years before it produced its first edible apple. And I walked away from that, and I thought, my goodness, do I have the kind of faithful presence to what God's calling me to wait 4 years, like labor intensively for 4 years to see my first fruit? Am I willing to do that? Do I have the kind of character and competency to remain faithful what God's calling me to do for an extended period of time, knowing that fruit will come? So here's some reflection questions as you think about pacing in your own environment, in your own church context. One is this: in what areas is God inviting you to take a longer view? Like, where is he inviting you to have a longer perspective or adjust your expectations so they're a little more realistic? And secondly, this is just helpful for you to know with these 2 areas of temptation. Are you more tempted to blow things up by moving too fast, or leaving for greener grass? So if any of those stir in you, I think we got a few moments for questions again, and I encourage you to put those in the comment bar, and we'll take a minute or two to interact with some of those.
Yeah, good. So if you guys do have questions, feel free to put them in there. I haven't seen any come through. I could be just missing them, but anyway, feel free to put them in there. Matt, I wondered if you had a question for Mac as you were listening to him.
Yeah, which temptation is most present for you? To leave or to blow it up?
Probably depends upon the day. No, I feel, the one thing I would say is that both my wife Josie and I feel incredibly called to our context. And so I would say for me, it's probably to push too hard and too fast with the people that I'm in relationship with. It's not to say that there aren't days where there's frustration and you're like, wouldn't it be better to be in a different place? But we're just so immersed here that it would be hard to transition out. We feel we're where we're supposed to be, and even though there are challenges, the reward is as you stay in one place and work through those challenges, growth happens. You know, growth is happening in us, and we're being formed as we stay faithful to the context God has put us in.
Yeah. I have another question for Mac.
Okay.
How do you discern between, and maybe you can think through this, how do you discern, I mean, there's one thing to be patient. It's another thing to be complacent in the midst of stagnation. Right? So how do you discern the difference between a faithful patience and a complacent lethargy or stagnation?
Yeah, so okay, like with the apple tree, for example, although they're taking care of it for 4 years, there's probably there's like growth and things are moving in the right direction that whole time until they can eat the first apple. And I would say the same thing here. If there were no forward motion, if there was never a win, if there was never any evidence that the Spirit of God is like doing something and we're getting alongside of it, then I would say we have a culture of complacency. But see, in order to understand our context, you got to go, okay, we have a church of 1,500 people. To the average person attending our church, they love what we're doing, and they wouldn't say any shift really needs to happen. And so the challenge for us, it's not a jet ski where you can just like change directions right away. It's like this massive ship. And you want to be able to change in a way that preserves trust with your people. You won't be able to do that perfectly, right? But I think the win for me is we have God stories every week of where God is at work and how we're joining it. And then secondly, the permission meter for me and for other staff members is really high to start living into this stuff. And so there really isn't an opportunity to be complacent with it. It's more a challenge of having it catch on with other people in the way we're already living.
Yeah, that's good.
Does that make sense?
Good. It's really good. We've got time for one more question, and then we're gonna shut it down. Derek asked a great question, I think. He said, how do you do this slow missional work with a transient context? So a context where people, it takes 4 years to get an apple, but people move out in 2 years. And so how do you do this kind of work in that kind of a context?
It's a great question, Derek. I was in a context like that as well. I think that one of the gifts or fruit we see this we see this in Acts and in the Gospels even. Like we see people staying places. Sometimes Paul stays places for years, and every time he leaves, it's not because he's done, but it's because he's created a community that can bear with stability the kind of life that he's taught and modeled. And so I don't know any other way. I don't know how to do it with our rhythms and patterns of the 21st century world, short term, short burn. The only thing I can encourage you to do is call people into a missional vision that gives them a reason to stay. I mean, we typically make decisions based upon what? I got this job over there, or I want to live closer to the mountains. But what if we gave people reasons to move or stay for the who? I'm on mission with these people. God is at work here. How could I leave? How could I leave? So I think creating a community of faith, of practice, that changes the question from when do I get to move on to how could I leave, I think is important, and especially if we're in context of like colleges or students, the kind of thing. I think people will always be moving. Well, we can cultivate a community that makes people want to stay because they are participating in something that fulfills their deepest longings and why they were created. Those are just a few thoughts.
That's great. That's great. Well, guys, really appreciate Mac, you, and Matt, taking the time to assemble this content for us. It's been really helpful.
Yeah.
Really helpful for me. So I'm glad I attended this webinar. Really glad for that. One more plug for you guys here at the end. The 30 days to kickstart your life on mission. Again, it is 30 days of. There's videos. I think we filmed a total of 22 different videos that are about 5 to 10 minutes each. It's us talking about some of the practical things that we can do day by day to get into this habit of living a life on mission. Because this stuff doesn't happen overnight. It oftentimes takes little steps that we need to take over and over again. And so we've tried to design this in such a way that in 30 days, hopefully some new habits will be able to be formed in your life to allow you to pay attention to what Jesus is doing in your neighborhood and in your relational networks, and then to be able to step into that. So if you want to take advantage of that, click over to the Offers tab and click Buy Now. You can get it for $30. We're going to be selling it for $47 once it comes out, and that'll be coming out in the next week or so. So I think that is it for us. Anything we need to say at the end here? Matt, you got anything?
No, it's good.
All right. So hopefully, from now on, none of us will be like Vicini in this capture from the movie, who is using words that he doesn't know anything about. Hopefully, we're all well educated now about what it means to be missional. You guys have been great. It's been lovely to hang out with you. Thanks for enduring the technical difficulties. We'll try to get this sorted out before the next webinar. Pleasure being with you. We'll talk to you later.
Peace.
Bye-bye, guys.